And we are live right now. And I am thrilled beyond thrilled that you agreed to come back and do round two. Thank you so much. My name is Lisa Wilber. I'm recording from New Hampshire, and this is Leslie Bennetts, my shiro, who wrote this book that everybody that knows me, I've had so many copies of this because every time I see somebody who desperately needs it, I give them my copy and then I have to go buy another one. I we were talking just a second ago. Why is this still so relevant?
That's really the question. I That book came out in 2007, just before the crash of 2008, and the premise of the book was that it was about the risks of financial dependency for women, and it was a reaction to the fact that women were dropping out of the workforce for the first time in decades. They had started dropping out, opting out, as the New York Times called it, the opting out revolution, because they were being encouraged by the culture to think that it was a great idea to solve the stress of the juggling act between work and family by quitting their jobs and staying home for a period of years. And they were being told that you could just go back there and rejoin the work. No one was telling them in the mainstream media, which I've been there for about 100 years, was that they don't let you back in without this economic for. So I felt as though women were being led, down the primrose path. And by the time they realized what it had cost them to stop working for a period of years, it was too late to recover. And so, you would think in 15 years, so many things have changed, but it is so tragically still relevant. I mean, I was just reading the new statistics about poverty, and another complaint I have about the mainstream media is that they tend to cover the issue of poverty around the United States as if it were not a problem that is very, very heavily influenced by gender. I mean, the majority, women end up poor in their later years at approaching twice the rate of men. And yet we talk about poor poverty and poor people as if, what we were not talking about is, in fact, women and children. And the reason that women and children end up being poor is that women's standard of living goes off a cliff. I mean, there are all these stereotypes about women, profiting from divorce, but in fact, women's standard of living goes down and men's standard of living goes up, because the majority of child support cases, the men are careers, and they are usually men, just statistically. So, what you have is this ongoing problem where women make sacrifices with the best of intentions and reasons for what they perceive as the good of their families, but then they end up paying this terrible lifelong penalty for it that ends up impoverishing them and their families later on, or at least, if not impoverishing them in terms of being below the poverty line, certainly curtailing their options. And as we get older, when I wrote that book, the average age of widowhood in America was 54. Women think that widowhood is something that's going to happen to them much later. Right now, it's in the higher 50s, but it's gone down again because of COVID and a lot of deaths. So women are fed this romantic mythology that all you have to do is find Prince Charming or Mr. Right or whatever you want to call him, and he's going to take care of you until you die. And what they don't tell you is that this actually happens, that way for almost nobody, because for whatever reason, you're probably going to end up, on your own in your later years, whether through divorce or widowhood, or some women, never did get married or whatever. And, the vast majority, approaching 90%, men die with a wife or a partner to take care of them. And the percentage of women who die with a partner to take care of them is in the teens. So there's also this huge discrepancy. because women are just going it alone in their sort of act three, their, the later years of their lives. So what's absolutely crucial in order that I've read a lot of studies that say, oh, women, over 60 have to choose between buying their medications and buying food because they can't afford both. So, understanding that that is a fate that you really want to try very hard to avoid, and making your choices accordingly earlier in life is absolutely critical. And I am constantly astonished at how the power of our cultural and romantic mythologies just keeps on prevailing over just the realities of people's lives that we see all around us and we see in all the data.
You know what's sad to me is when I try to have a conversation with someone that has opted out of working, they act like I'm being judgmental, and
Right.
and really, I'm sitting here looking at them. In my mind, it's like watching a kitten on the highway. It's like
Yeah,
there's some odds they won't get hit, but it's not good.
exactly.
It's not good.
When I wrote The Feminine Mistake, I compared it frankly to playing Russian roulette. There will be, maybe, if there's, you know, one chamber that doesn't have a bullet, maybe you'll be that lucky person. But if all the other chambers have bullets, your odds are not good. But people don't like hearing this message. I think, there's a long history of, shooting the messenger. People don't like the bearer of bad tidings. But when I wrote The Feminine Mistake, I thought, I'm a reporter, I'm not a polemicist. I'm just somebody who gets information and presents it. And I thought I was doing something that was a public service to other women by showing them how this works out, by documenting the costs of this particular choice, because there's so much cultural pressure that tells us that in order, we have to be there for our families, we have to be there for our children, we have to be there for the baby's first step and for the baby's first word and this and, all of these other things. And that doesn't focus on, what the cost to us and to our families in the long run of those choices might be. But I was very unprepared for how many women were furious with me. They were just raged. A lot of women just felt like, for even saying that, you know? And so it's very discouraging how resistant we still are to understanding that in the 21st century, women have to take responsibility for their own lives and their own destinies. We've been, as I said, for hundreds, you could argue thousands of years, when women certainly were property. Um, that was not the deal, but God knows it's the deal now. And anybody who doesn't really grapple with those facts and, as I said, plan accordingly is just leaving themselves incredibly vulnerable.
It's funny you use that particular word because I woke up in the middle of the night when I knew we were gonna do this, and I wrote down this note that said, "Women act like it's a bonus to not work, or that work is
Yeah.
bad for them or their children, and the reality is that not working is being able and not being able to single-handedly pay all your bills to live leaves you and your children too vulnerable. It's just plain too risky." And the younger women, it's even worse because they're leaving their own children at risk and they don't think it's gambling.
And you talk to grown up with older mothers. I have interviewed so many adult children who have said, my mother thinks she did me this big favor. She was home making cookies when I was in the third grade. And now, when I should be starting my own life and paying off my student loan debts or whatever, I have to be responsible for her because my father died and she can't find a new husband to take care of her. And it's on me. And it's just ruining my life. They're not happy about this because their mothers never learned to take care of themselves. So it's not as though, you get a lot of gratitude on the other end necessarily for making this choice if the circumstances break your way. But a very rich friend of mine, unlike me, inherited money, um, always jokes that women who marry for money She says, earn every penny, because all it's not necessarily a picnic to have, be married to somebody who thinks you were bought and paid for, and therefore you have to do everything he says. Um, and The other thing is that in a lot of cultural traditions, and I won't criticize any ones in particular, but quite familiar with some cultural traditions where they tell girls to marry a rich guy so they never have to work. And one of the other things that I have consistently found in the research and tracking these issues over the years is that working women, contrary to the stress of the juggling act, which has been written about endlessly, the fact is that working women are happier and healthier than stay at home mothers, who have much higher levels of depression and substance abuse issues, and even a bunch of medical problems. So, having your own identity and having a feeling of stronger feeling of self-worth from the things that you do out in the world not only makes you happier as a mother and as a woman and as a person, but you're also role modeling that kind of strength and resiliency for your children, which has an enormous impact on your kids.
I was wondering how we're going to get this message, or it's just gonna be another generation of women that
Well,
I
I think social change, it's very frustrating because I've been covering these issues since the 1970s, when I was a reporter for the New York Times, among other newspapers. And excuse me, social change is a very uneven process, and it's often two steps forward and one step back, and sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back. And it is certainly the case, we're living in through a period right now where there is an enormous backlash around a lot of issues involving women's rights and women's progress. But I do feel, I have, my children are millennials, their partners are millennials, all their friends are, so I'm very close to a lot of millennial kids. um, the young women are extremely involved in and passionate about their careers, and God knows have a sense of opportunities and the freedom to choose them that I didn't have at that age. And it's a constant reminder to me that even though change may be incremental and frustrating, in how many roadblocks are still put in our way, it is still ongoing, and that young women do think about this stuff in much vaster numbers than they ever did before. But there are, again, certain cultural traditions, when you have evangelical traditions preaching, the submissive wife, for example, that and just should do whatever the husband says, even if that's just to stay home and do housework and take care of the kids. There are these traditions that are actively trying to prevent women from exploring their own potential as individuals. So that does tend to inhibit people in those particular, demographics.
I wouldn't think that men would wanna promote that either, because then they're a commodity practically that women have to get another one to
Yeah,
survive.
never
Why would men wanna be treated like that?
to men, the idea that women, look at men as a meal ticket, which was, I mean, if women were property, it was important, to marry a man who had either the ability to work or some means, because you needed him to support you and your children, because you weren't allowed to work and do it yourself. But that's not the case anymore. And I've always been puzzled by the fact that men aren't bothered, if a rich older guy is dating a, hot younger woman, like, why doesn't it bother him to know that she's only dating him because he has some money? Not look at him, for a second if he lost his money. I like the feeling that somebody loves me for myself, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, me too. Yeah. The other thing I hear from some of my friends lately is that they still don't feel that they have to generate an income because they believe the insurance policy that the husband took out will tide them through no matter how long they live, and I still
Well,
don't feel that's right.
you know, I
Well,
mean,
the guy would have to be a well-paid corporate executive to have a giant insurance policy, because insurance companies won't insure people for $1,000,000 or whatever it is. So I guess if you're willing to live just on Social Security, which this person wouldn't have much because they didn't work. Yeah,
right.
I'm not sure the strategy, but
Well, the point,
she keeps assuring me that the insurance will carry her through.
yeah, that's absolutely silly, and to tell them to do math. I mean, my best male friend's mother just died, and she was 106, and it has been 50 years since she was widowed. So if you take what it costs you to live per year and multiply that by 50, I mean, most of the women in my family were widowed by the time they were 60 and lived another 30 years. So, people think, oh, they have a, I mean, I've certainly read interviews with women who say, oh, my husband has a life insurance policy for, $100,000. Well, how many deaths that could have?
Right.
um it's not. And so there's just this they're living kind of in this little fantasy bubble where they're not actually doing the arithmetic. So I would certainly, with women like that, start by saying, do the math, figure out how much it costs. You look at your family, history. Everybody now lives longer than their parents and grandparents did because of improved medical technologies. So it's very hard to predict. My friend whose mother just died, he said to me a few years ago, he said, I thought I'd done due diligence. I projected like all of the financial possibilities up to and including the idea that my mother could live to be 100, and she lived to be 106 and 3/4. So, that's like my worst fear, is living that long. I mean, no matter how much money you've saved for your old age, it's pretty hard to,
Right.
but if women are not mindful of this possibility, they're frankly being irresponsible, and their children, or they may.
Well, now if you don't mind, I know you read the book because you wrote us a fabulous endorsement. But to me, that can help solve some of the problems is direct sales, because young mothers could do it along with their children. They wouldn't have to go in somewhere. They can do it because I adopted an infant and still kept my business going, and I have a big business. So I'm that's why I was so excited to do this book project, because of the direct sales angle. Do you have much experience or been around direct sales that much?
Absolutely zero, but yeah, but you've touched on a very important point. One of the biggest things that has changed in the last 15 years is the possibility of remote work. And it used to be that, women who were trying to get back into the workforce, the doors were really closed. A gap on your resume. I think if it was as much, as little as 3 years or something, you lost like 38% of your earning power for the rest of your life. Women just had no idea what kind of penalties that they were going to incur by taking even a brief time out. But now that the possibility of remote work because of the pandemic has become such an active issue and a widespread option, I think that's a real game changer, particularly for women. The downside of the pandemic was that when both the husband and the wife were home, and both of them had full-time jobs, but somebody had to do the homeschooling. It was, the research or the polling shows that it was the women who got stuck with it and felt very unhappy about it in a lot of cases, because it was very hard for them to maintain their job responsibilities when they were, essentially doing a full-time job of childcare. But I personally do think that it is just incredibly helpful to be able to work from home. I did when I was pregnant with my first child, I quit my job at the New York Times, a newspaper reporter, where I had to go in every day. And I went to Vanity Fair, a monthly magazine, where I had much more control over my own time and my own deadlines. And from then on, I worked from a home office. So I was had a lot more flexibility to juggle the whole work family thing. And another piece of this that has changed a lot in the last 15 years is female entrepreneurship, which has really just taken off like crazy. A young woman I know, Allie Kriegsman, wrote a book called How to Build a Goddamn Empire about young women entrepreneurs. She's a young millennial who built a tech company and sold it a few months ago very successfully. And so what I see a tremendous amount of interest, in all of these areas where women are taking their own hands, because corporate America is still very sexist and resistant to female authority. I mean, the United States still hasn't had a female president. There's an awful lot of countries who have had women lead. We do seem to be rather slow in this country to kind of get with the modern era around a lot of these issues. And as is almost always the case when women try to do things that men do, as Allie Kriegsman points out in all of her speeches, women still get about 2% of the venture capital funding that male entrepreneurs get. So again, they're up against a lot of sexist barriers, but they are prevailing and they are succeeding. And we can all name women multimillionaires and even billionaires who have become very successful entrepreneurs. And so anything, I think, that enables women to be freed from the tyranny of office hours as they traditionally used to be, is very helpful, because anybody who's been a parent knows that you cannot control for times when you get a call from the preschool teacher, at 10:30 in the morning, saying that the child you just dropped off 2 hours ago now has a fever of 103 and is projectile vomiting, and you need to come and get them, and you don't have childcare coverage, and you're up a creek without a paddle. So anything, whether it's direct sales or anything else that enables us to have some control over both our responsibilities and how we live up to them, it's just a huge plus.
It's funny. I knew that I was going to do this book when I talked to you in March, and I didn't fess up because my co-author is a man. And
To be ashamed of.
well, you know what? I wasn't sure. I knew him, of course, or I wouldn't have said yes, but I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out. And it is so funny because in my life experience, I'm almost 60. I have not had that good of luck with men listening to what I say. And this, right. So the whole project.
I have to interrupt you and say, please, I'm begging you, do that female thing of framing it if somehow something that you have been the victim of is somehow your fault because you haven't had good luck or whatever. That's not a matter of luck. We all know that. I mean, again, I could point to a huge amount of social science research about the ways that men interact with women in professional situations, from interrupting what they have to say, ignoring their ideas, and then recycling them and taking credit for them themselves, expecting women to do a lot, extra unpaid labor that, a secretary or a wife in, old fashioned terms might do, or, just the work that they don't want to do. I mean, there's just a whole panoply of those behaviors that every woman who's ever been in the workforce has encountered. So
Well, see, that's why this was unusual.
is reality based, you
Yeah,
know.
so this guy, I met him in a Success Alliance with Bob Berg, and he is the writer. He writes parables, but I wasn't prepared for. I don't write like that. I write how-to books, so I wasn't writing this. He was, but he's basing it on my ideas and stuff. So we would talk, and then he'd send me a chapter, and I would actually gasp every time he got bits of my story in it because I couldn't believe he was listening to me.
Shocking, absolutely shocking. You know, you know, I I interview women and I travel all over the country speaking around these issues all the time. So, you know, I get a lot of input from women, and a lot of women over a certain age have given up on dating, and partly it's because, you know, a successful 60-year-old man often feels as if he's dating someone age appropriate if she's 38 instead of 20. You know, he's not looking for a 60-year-old peer to go out with. But the larger reason, the thing that I hear most often from from women is they'll go out on a date with somebody and he'll talk about himself straight for, you know, 5 hours without taking a breath. And then they'll say, "Oh my, such a good time. You know, when can I see you again?" And it's, you know, the woman's response like that old joke, like, "Never. How about never? Never work for you?" You know, um, it's like when, you know, I used to, when I was young and dating, I just was always amazed that all you had to do was listen to them and they would decide that they were in love with you. I would feel like saying, "You don't know me at all. You know nothing about me. Ask me one question. You know, you haven't listened at all." But unfortunately, those behaviors are really very persistent among men, and I'm always sort of amused, although not in a ha ha funny way, when I read that men are like, "Well, what do you have to do to, it's, you know, to please women these days? I don't even know what they want." Well, one of the things that we would really like is to be able to have a conversation with you and have you actually listen. It's kind of like a tennis game, you know, the ball goes back and forth. It doesn't just sit there in one place the whole time.
I wish
Not,
I hope
yeah, for a lot of people.
I hope you actually get to meet my co-author at some point because I don't I even asked him, I said, "He has got a wider emotional range than I do." And I even said, you know, "Are you sure you're not a chick?"
You ask him how he came to have it. I mean, how he learned this.
He has 2 daughters and no
Well,
sons, so maybe it just 'cause they're grown, the daughters are in their late 20s, I think it is.
I
I'm not sure 'cause he just he's a lot different than most men that I've met for that reason. Not
yeah.
only does he listen, but he's got an emotional range that I don't have.
I think that there's so much conversation these days about how men aren't doing well, and you know, and again, the data is pretty depressing. I mean, you know, more men are not working than ever before. Men have a tremendous amount of substance abuse problems around drugs and alcohol. You know, there's a lot of depression. There's a lot of violence, domestic violence. Uh, you know, virtually all of our mass shooters are men. Men act out. You know, I saw this road rage thing the other day where two men in California got mad at each other in some, you know, driving thing, and each of them shot the other's daughter. So there's just this incredible amount of crazy behavior of men acting out. And, you know, in my personal opinion, having talked to thousands and thousands of women over a very long career at this point of focusing on these issues, you know, what women want from men is not a mystery. They want them to act like decent, responsible grown-ups, you know, who respect people of both genders and who are ready to grow beyond uh, the way they were socialized, having an unearned feeling of entitlement about a lot of things that, you know, are not a given anymore just because you're a man. You know, when I first entered the workforce, you know, women still couldn't get credit in their own name. The jobs available to women were secretary, nurse, and teacher, and you had to leave when you got pregnant. And nobody ever talked about rape, and marital rape wasn't even a concept. So, we have a very, again, in the, along the lines of the fact that social change happens slowly, but it does happen. There's been a lot of progress around all of these issues. And I think men are feeling very angry and indignant that they can't get away with what they used to get away with. That since the Me Too movement, women are speaking out about sexual harassment and sexual coercion and a lot of those things. From the point of view of many women, it's, high time that they were held accountable for these things. But the whole picture isn't rocket science. What women want from men, I think, in the workplace or in marriage or, just walking down the street is pretty simple and pretty basic in terms of human decency. I mean, I always go back to the golden rule, do unto others. If you wouldn't want somebody to do this to your daughter or your sister or your wife or your mother, then don't do it to that woman that's walking down the street. I don't think this is terribly complicated, but it seems to be a hard to get across the majority of the population.
Well, I don't know. Meeting and working with him has gave me new hope somehow. I don't know because I didn't realize that men could not be shallow. He's not shallow. He's a smart guy. As a matter of fact, I'm pride myself in being the hardest working person in any project. He's given me a run for my money. I can't outwork him. It's been tough. So,
Everybody wants men. I mean, God knows, apart from sexual orientation, but certainly, straight women, that's what we want in our lives is men who are emotionally intelligent and respectful and responsive and living up to their commitments. As I said, what you see when you look around is a lot of people who are not living up to their commitments, and everybody pays the price. I mean, so a bunch of the millennials I know, have a running gag. It's not terribly funny that they call the Bad Dad Club because their fathers all ran off, with girlfriends and left the family stranded financially, and didn't ever pay a cent of the kids' tuition and all of these, or child support or any of these other things. So, even with the basics, there's just this big hole at the center of American life and American family life where where we need responsible men to be. So tell your collaborator and co-author that he should write about this specifically, because other men apparently need a lot of help.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he realizes how different he is, but maybe I should clue
Yeah.
him in.
To
Yeah.
tell him to tell him to write about this. I mean, that's a book that ought to get written, because what you're describing is, as I said, I interview women constantly all over the country, red states, blue states, every kind of background, every socioeconomic level. And what you hear from women, it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor or black or white or what they are, is or gay or straight, because even gay women have to work with men and straight men. And you hear the same thing from everyone. So please tell your friend to share the news.
Yeah, I wonder. I'd like to meet it. Well, I don't think his mother's alive. I say I'd like to meet his mama. Maybe she's the one that told him. I don't
I'll
know.
tell you, I know it's obnoxious to brag, but one thing that I'm really proud of is I have a boy and a girl. My son is now 30. He's a tech entrepreneur too, but I used to get these letters, these thank you letters from former girlfriends of his saying, I don't know how you did it, how you raised this boy who's actually non-sexist and respectful of women. Well, he had a feminist mother and a feminist sister. And, I guess he grew up, being reminded on a daily basis that you weren't allowed to, treat women like, servants, or to be abusive in the ways that some men seem to take for granted. As I said, I don't think it's rocket science, but I do notice that people are shocked, when you manage to achieve that. But since I found it pretty simple, again, I go back to the golden rule. Anybody can do it. This is not a complicated thing. It's just you have to think it through, be conscious in your, in the ways that you interact.
Well, and let's not make this too much about the men's behavior only, because women need to take responsibility. Whatever they do, we can't make them act right. We
Yeah,
might as well just take responsibility and do what's best for ourselves and our children,
I,
because we shouldn't be kittens on the highway.
I agree. I mean, I am a realist. I suppose I might say life has made me into something of a cynic. There's a lot of things that I can't change. And so the thrust of a lot of my work has been along the lines of saying to women, look, here's the reality as we find it. Yes, it's important for women to work together to change the things that are still unfair, like not getting equal pay for equal work and that kind of thing, which affects all of us. But while we do that, we also have to take responsibility for our own lives, our own wealth, own futures, and if we have children, for our own children. And that means dealing with the facts as they are now. And so, again, going, I wrote The Feminine Mistake, a lot of women were outraged by the underlying message that I was trying to get out there, which is ultimately you are responsible for you. And if you think that someone else is going to do this job until the day you die, that's a fantasy that is very unlikely to come true. I mean, material statistics alone show you that, And yes, there's this very pervasive cultural mythology that kind of conspires to trick us, in my opinion, and women will say, oh, I definitely don't want to find another husband because I die alone. And as I said before, referring to the actual statistics of women's lives, chances are really overwhelming that you're going to die alone, even if you find, 7 or 8 husbands along the way. So to me, it's better to make your peace with that. And, I always start with, what's the worst case scenario? And I plan for that. So anything that, turns out better than that, I'm very pleased, but I was always prepared. When the guy who invented the Boy Scouts, started the Boy Scouts, came up with the Boy Scouts motto, it was be prepared. And somebody said to him, well, be prepared for what? And he said, well, I don't know, for anything. And that's kind of, the way that I've gone through life, and why, at this point, even at my advanced old age, I'm still, surviving and thriving, is because I have never, counted on the best case scenario when that's a very, when the chances are slim. I don't think that's a safe or a wise way to go through life. I just think it's better to be prepared, I mean, it's like a lot of the way that a lot of women, live reminds me of, what places like Florida are going through in the wake of this last hurricane. It's like if you keep building your house on a floodplain that gets clobbered by hurricanes with great regularity, people have this endless capacity to be surprised when the opposite happens. And I'm like, you built your house on a floodplain, and historically once every 8 or 10 years the whole thing gets wiped out, and you can't even get flood insurance anymore because the insurance companies have figured this out. So what is it about this that you're not getting, um, and that's kind of the analogy that I refer back to in terms of making my own decisions. What
You know,
stupid risks am I in taking that I shouldn't be taking, that I really be more sensible and more realistic about?
You know what's funny is I don't like it when, like my last husband, don't judge. I have to number them like a football team. But anyway, the last one, even though I was making six-figure income, he told the therapist that the only thing that I could do well that he could think of was fold a fitted sheet. And right,
Nobody can
right.
eat well.
R
Nobody.
he needed to go, right, but you know what? I think to myself, though, in our book, um, she reverse thinks that about the guy next door. Her refrigerator breaks, and she thinks he can fix it, and instead of him fixing it, he says, "Let me show you what I do, because I don't know how to do that stuff either. I'm gonna look it up on YouTube," and he teaches her how to look stuff up on YouTube is what it is. So, we shouldn't expect men to have specific things that they do either, like big hair of the lawn and the whatever, if we don't want them to think that we're gonna be the domestic person whether we are or not. So, I think we have to treat them. I know it's gonna be hard because they're gonna look at us. But I try not to do that anymore, look at men as if that they're supposed to be doing the fix up stuff.
I will now admit to you something that I have not ever admitted to anybody. Along these lines that we're asking men to change with the times. I think women have changed a lot with the times, but all of us, I would guess most of us often find ourselves falling back on these kind of knee-jerk assumptions, or the things that we absorbed from the culture when we were younger. A while back, I had a man that I was involved with who was staying with me, and one, and he's this big, tall, strong guy, 6'4", and very handy, and he knows how to do a lot of stuff. And although we were collaborating on a project, a writing project, but one night, quite late, there was some crisis. I live in an apartment building in New York City, and the thing that you're most afraid of, which is gas leak, was apparently happening from a different apartment where there had been work done. And so all of a sudden, there's all this frenzy of, people in my building getting involved, and then eventually Con Edison came and turned off the gas. But at one point, I caught myself. I looked up, like I didn't know where the things were to turn off various things with the gas. And I looked at this guy that I was with, and I meant it partly as a joke, but sadly it came from a really deep place inside me. And I said, I don't know how to deal with this. I'm just asking you to tell me what to do. You're the man. Oh, and I thought, oh my God, life, this dedication to women's progress. And I still, in this moment of crisis where I'm worried about a gas leak, the whole building blowing up, I revert to that. And it really speaks to a deeper need, which is, isn't there somebody else who's going to take care of this? Isn't there somebody else who can take care of me? And I was talking to a therapist a few years ago about feeling that for various reasons involving my parents, has been a lot of different aspects of my life, that nobody had ever really taken care of me in a responsible way. And she said something to me that really changed my life. And she said, there are many ways that you did not get the kind of reassurance and care that you needed as a child, but you have long since turned into a very strong and resilient and competent grown up. And she said, Leslie, you are the person who can take care of yourself. And that's been my, mantra ever since. When I am in doubt, or when I'm afraid, that past is the best predictor of the future. And, you just have to reprogram yourself to know that ultimately you yourself are the person that you can rely on, and that if you learn to do the things that as in your book, where, if there's nothing, if there's something you don't know how to do, well, there's probably a YouTube instruction video on it, that mental leap that it's not someone else's responsibility. And ultimately, in my lifetime, women have gone from being infantilized by the culture and the legal system and the economic system and everything else to being, forced to take responsibility for their own lives. This is a quantum leap. This has not happened ever before in the history of humankind. So for those of us who have our moments of, panic or 3 a.m., insomniac dread or whatever, I mean, that is only to be expected. It's a lot of change that, I'm a baby boomer, that we have had to absorb in our adult lifetime. But in fact, we've managed it pretty well. Most of us have, kind of grown up, raised our kids with or without their father's help, and are still carrying on. So that in itself is a huge achievement.
No, I'm glad things are the way they are, and I'm glad I wasn't born 100 years ago. That's what I can say,
Yeah.
because I'd have been hung like a witch in the square.
I'm going to have to move because I need to plug in my phone, which is about to run out of juice. But I have been reading a lot about witchcraft, and I saw something on a PBS station the other night. We all know about the Salem witch trials in America, but the first witch that was actually burned at the stake, hung and burned at the stake, was in Scotland 100 years before the Salem witch trials in America. And it is astonishing the way that they singled out women who had property, who had the respect of their communities, and whose assets could be seized by the men who prosecuted and condemned them for witchcraft. So female power has always been very threatening to the power structures of the prevailing civic and religious authorities. But for the time being, at least, they're not prosecuting us for witchcraft, so that's a plus.
What's funny is I bet you this sounds elementary, but I bet you they don't realize that we bring something to the table that they not currently have the range to even think of, because we have a whole different perspective. And there's half the consumers out there. If they're selling something, and most companies are, women are at least half of the consumers, sometimes even more. So if they only had women's opinions, they would be ahead of the game. They would have an insight.
I mean, it's not a coincidence, when women's rights advocates first started arguing for including women in management and power structures and on boards. The initial case that was made by the women's movement was altruism, that it was the right thing to do to include women. But then that got superseded because people started doing research, and they found out that companies that had more diverse management, again, and just their own managerial structures or on boards or whatever, actually did better. And this is not surprising because they were mindful of the needs of the larger half. Let us not forget the larger half of the human population. And similarly, all my life I had a couple of jobs very early before I went into journalism in the advertising business, and I just have always been flabbergasted at the stupidity of a lot of traditional advertising. It's like the ways that the men who ran that business, I don't know if you ever saw the TV series Mad Men.
Oh no.
Well, people asked me if that was an exaggeration. I was like, not only was it not an exaggeration, if anything, it underplayed the way that the virulence of the sexism back then. But it's like these guys who wrote these ads as if their wives and other female consumers were these just morons. You just feel like saying, have you ever actually even like met a woman or talked to, any women? Does this resemble your wife? I doubt that a whole lot, because it took moving women into the rooms where the decisions were being made to start reflecting more accurately the world that we see around us. And it turned out that was good for business. What a shock.
You know what? One thing I hate about myself is when I did get a chance to go to corporate Avon, actually, and I was on some committee meeting. When I'd get frustrated, I would cry. Oh, how
Usually not the
frustrating.
best move, I've found personally, but I'm an easy
No, that was
crier,
how
so
oh, I am not, I am not, but it was just sometimes they were just so frustrating to
yeah,
me, like they would say, "We'll never do that," and I said, "No, wait a minute. This company is 180 no, 135 years old. You can't say ever. You can say, 'Not on my watch will this happen,'
yeah.
but you can't say never, because that never is gonna be true. As soon as you leave, they're gonna do it." And that would be so frustrating that I would, like, cry of frustration, and that made
I
me look
know,
weak. That made me look weak,
I
and
know.
it was maddening for me.
I think I I saw some clip the other day of Warren
Mm.
Buffett of all people talking about how to be successful in marriage. Uh, um, and he said, you have to lower your expectations to almost zero. And there I would make an analogy toward to the process of moving through life. It's not that you lower your expectations to zero, but I think it is extremely important to take a long view and to have perspective at moments like that, when you're confronted by a room full of men who are hostile to common sense, not to mention long overdue progress, and who are just being so unfathomably stupid and bigoted about it. um you know History is not on their side, right? The course of history is pretty obvious. It's, as I said, it's doesn't move as fast as some of us wish that it did, but it's pretty clear what direction it's been moving in. And these guys are going to be consigned to the dustbins of history. And so I always try to visualize it as if you're looking at whatever scene you're looking at through a telescope. If you just pull up a little bit and get a little bit more altitude on it, it does tend to put things in perspective, because once you get to be over 40 or 50, you realize how profoundly the world has changed and how it continues to change. Young women just are not taking the kind of nonsense that women of my generation routinely took, partly because we were told in no uncertain terms that there were no alternatives. I mean, the first time I ever, my first newspaper job, um, I was sexually assaulted in the elevator on my third day of
Oh
work.
god.
Yeah, by what turned out I'd never met him, but he turned out to be the book editor. And later, there were no HR departments in those days, and the term sexual harassment had not been invented yet. But when the executive editor asked me out for a drink to talk about my career, and I told him what had happened to me getting attacked in the elevator, and he chuckled as if that was a very amusing story, and then he made a pass at me. So, that was what you were up against then, and there was no recourse. So, all of these things
Would would you have
continue.
got in trouble if you had, harmed them? Because I think that's
Physically.
what would have happened, right. I think they would have, I don't know, had to go get somebody to, let's see, a proctologist to get my foot out of their ass.
Well,
Ooh.
you fought back as best you could uh, under
Oh,
circumstances. So, I mean,
wow.
I was a reporter, so I was meeting new men every day, and they were always, taking body parts out of their clothing, while I was trying to interview them, and just doing things that you just can't believe that men grew up with a sense of entitlement that it was okay to do that stuff, but they did. And these days, a lot of men are still doing bad things if you look at the crime statistics. But I think more of them know that there might be a price,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Wow. I didn't know all that happened to you. I'm sorry that happened to you. That's awful.
Oh my God, it's standard, it's just the way of the world. I mean, when the Me Too scandal broke, I was touring the country and I was for a book that I had come out that year, and I walked into some speaking engagement, and the PR person for this organization had said, "Oh, I used to work with Harvey Weinstein, and I've been dying to know what you thought about, this whole thing." And one of the men in the sort of delegation of dignitaries
Mm-mm.
that was greeting me at the door said, "Well, what about you? When you were young, did you ever get sexually harassed?" And I looked at him like, wow, what planet do you live on? Not the one I've lived on. I said, well, yeah, every day for about 25 years. And he was like, what? As if this was an entirely foreign concept to him. Um, and I have I was a tall blonde in those days, and I have a tall blonde daughter. And although her life has had its challenges, uh those aspects of her life as a professional working woman have been a lot better. um, a lot of men know that you can't do this stuff in the workplace anymore, which is not in any way to say that the problem has been solved, because it hasn't. And, we all know men are fighting back in the courts and so on and so forth. But I do believe that it is very important, when women get very discouraged about the problems that we are still up against, to recognize how much progress has been made. Never lose sight of that. You know, it's like it's the saying, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I still believe that.
What's funny is I think I managed to stay. It's not that I never got harassed by a man, of course, but when I did, I gave it back worse than I got it, and they shut up after a while. But but the other thing is, because I've done Avon since I was 18, it's mostly women, and the corporate people that I had to deal with locally were women. So I haven't had to deal with that many men, only at big corporate, and then I cried.
Well,
Horror,
I
horror.
deal with a lot of women in the course of my professional life, and I must say, I know there are a lot of stereotypes out there about mean girls and this and that, but I generally find it a complete pleasure to deal with other women, no matter what their life circumstances are. And this is a time when there's a lot being said and written about identity politics, but I just think there's so much more that unites women than that separates them. There are so many things we are up against and have to deal with all of our lives, simply by virtue of the fact that we are born in female bodies, and how that changes the way that the world relates to us and treats us and rewards us for our labors. So,
Though,
I'm a
I
big fan of women.
that's almost where I'm having a problem, though, is because I'm not surrounded by a lot of women that are taking responsibility for themselves.
Really?
So I end up being more, I relate to men because they think I'm acting like a guy because I have my own house, I have everything. I'm just self-reliant. There aren't many the women see, I need to hang around with different women. That's the
Well,
upshot. Cuz most of the women, it's not, they're either not doing this full time, or they're not working somewhere else full time. They're
how
acting
old are
like it
they?
doesn't depend on them. I have friends all different ages, but I would say 50s, which is a recipe for disaster, in my
Well, that's the
opinion.
thing. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote The Feminine Mistake was that I was in my 50s, and I had suddenly seen what happens when you hit your 50s, which is that the marriages start going over like a row of dominoes, and all these
Yeah.
women, these smug married women, and I certainly was one of them at the time, who think, oh, those bad things will never happen to me. are suddenly having, terrible shocks as their life circumstances change. So, you see a lot of the older Gloria Steinem used to say, it takes life to make a feminist. And it is certainly true that no matter where you start out in terms of your belief systems, just seeing the things that happen routinely to women in the system that we have created in this country, and how unjust they are, and still how how little support we get for the challenges that we have to face. It really, if you are remotely, thinking about what you're encountering, it does change the way that you see things, because it becomes impossible to deny that we need to fix some of these things, for our daughters and everyone else's daughters, and for future.
Well, some women, they act like they're a lone victim in this when the husband runs off or dies or whatever happens, and that they're left alone. They're not realizing that they just are they're in the average category.
Yeah.
So they're
There's a lot,
thinking,
but
"Oh, I'm
there's a lot of
unlucky."
victim blaming. There's
Yeah.
the culture conspires to make women feel as though everything is their fault. So if the husband runs off, people will say, "Oh, it's a shame you didn't marry the right man. My husband's such a nice guy. He would never do something like that." And of course, the following year, their husband does that, whatever it is. But and what we're not really grappling with is the fact that the reason that these things happen so pervasively is the sort of patriarchal ways that we have socialized men and women so differently, that men have these feelings of entitlement. A lot of men feel that just because they're married, that doesn't mean they, can't sleep with other people. A lot of men feel, there's not just sexual infidelity, there's what they call financial infidelity, that they make unilateral decisions about money, and some of them are really stupid. I mean, I did a biography of Joan Rivers, and she handed over all of her financial dealings to her husband, and he screwed up her career,
Oh, no.
caused her to get fired, become a pariah in the entertainment industry, and then he killed himself. And when he died, she learned that he had not only squandered her enormous fortune, she had earned many millions of dollars, but she was $37 million in debt, which is not
Oh,
what you want to find out when you are 55 in the notoriously sexist entertainment industry. And the
yeah.
biography that I did of her turned out to be very inspiring to me and to a lot of other women, because in her 60s and 70s, she built $1 billion business out of, just this desperation thing that she did of starting to, design jewelry and dress, clothes, and sell them on QVC. So these stories of women reinventing themselves and taking responsibility for their lives at any point along the way. I mean, I always say in my talks, Grandma Moses did not pick up a paintbrush until she was 76, and arthritis made her unable to do the needlework that she used to do as a creative outlet. So she started to paint and became one of the most famous painters of the 20th century, with paintings that now sell for millions of dollars. So, some of the messaging that comes through these stories to me is, it's never too late to get wiser as well as older, and to start changing your thinking and taking responsibility for whatever aspects of your life turn out not to have worked. But don't blame yourself, because our entire system of, the combination of cultural indoctrination and the various structures of the workplace, and our religious and social systems have conspired to, as I said, trick us into, lull us into this false sense of complacency and security. And if you end up at the end of a long and happy life never having encountered any challenges, I salute you. You are lucky, and I don't know anybody like you. 'Cause
Yeah, don't blame
most of
blame
us run into
yourself.
challenges. Don't blame
Don't
yourself.
blame
It's not
yourself.
you. It's the world.
However, Take responsibility
Yeah.
for yourself, though. And everybody, so we're already at an hour. I am so happy that you came back. Oh, thank you so much. And everybody, go out and get this, The Feminine Mistake, right here. This I
And
hope you do.
the subtitle that the publisher put on that was, "Are we giving up too much?" And I would just like to say, yes, we are giving up too much, and we've got to stop. You know, we've got to start getting our due. It's long overdue.
No, and I hope that they talk you into doing a little more, coming out with that again. Or
Well, I'm
I'm
dealing
gonna
with it in
keep
my next book. So,
I'm going to keep giving that out too, because
well,
it's a
thank you.
message everyone has to hear. And thank you so much. So
Thank you.
you know the drill. Do you want more? Did you have brownies last time? What would
Ah,
you like? They have
whatever.
they have
And
some pink cookies.
I'd like to wish you luck also with your book. So,
Oh, thank you.
and please do tell your co-author to get his messaging out there, because we need to hear from more men like that, because there's a lot of lovely men out there. They just need to speak up more.
I will, because he's shockingly awesome.
Yeah, please.
I shouldn't have been shocked, but I'm shocked.
Okay.
Thank you so
Best
much.
of luck. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Bye.
Stay there a sec.